welcome to this video where we're gonna go through the essentials of the pivot table in under 10 minutes. So we have a large data set here of a business, and it's a very large business. As you can see, there are 10,000 rows of data, and that's where the pivot table comes in handy. The pivot table is very useful when you want to summarize large data sets. And I've prepared some questions which you can practice as you watch the video or after you watch the video. So let's get started. To insert a pivot table, we just have to click on any cell in the table, and then we go on Insert and click on Pivot Table. And then we can create a pivot table in a new worksheet. Let's just rename this worksheet to Pivot Table so we have clarity. And then let's just copy the question so we don't have to go back and forth between the sheets. So the first question asks us to show total sales by region. So what we do is we click here and then we go and we find region. And we put it in the rows and then the sales in the values because that's the value we want to see. And we have the sales by region here. I'm just going to change this into accounting format so it's clearer. And we're done. That's question 1 already done. So on to question 2, show total sales by customer. So instead of going to the data set and creating a new pivot table, what we can simply do is copy the existing pivot table and then paste. And as we already have the region table, we create a new one for customer. So we just remove region and put customer in the rows, and there we have it, sales by customer. The third question asks us, who are the largest 2 customers? Who are the 2 largest customers? To do that, we can either create a new pivot table, or we can just go here and then do value filters and go to top 10. And instead of 10, we can simply change it by 2. And there we have it. The 2 largest customers are Alice and Dave, who have been spending a lot. Anyways, on to the next question. Which product is the most ordered? So again, we just copy the pivot table and we paste it. And then we are going to have to change 2 things. So first, we're going to have to insert product. We're going to remove customer. And then we don't need sum of sales. Instead, what we would need is the quantity of the product to identify which product has been sold the most. And we put count of product. For your reference, you can change this to sum, average, min, max. There's a lot of options. But in an interview or in a test, you're most likely going to encounter the top 3. So since we're looking for the most ordered product, we're looking at count. Next, it asks us to add a slicer to show sales by category. So what we have to do is click on one of the pivot tables and then right click on category, since this is what we want a slicer of. And we add as a slicer. And what a slicer is, it is an interactive filter that allows you to play around with the data if you want to look at something quickly. So if I were to want to see what the electronic sales would look like, I would just click on electronics and then the data changes immediately. Or if I want to select multiple data, I can just do this and I get 2 data points. But I want to see for all of the data, so I'm just going to clear the filter. And you might be wondering why these numbers are not changing. That's because we created the slicer based on the first pivot table. But if you want to have these tables react to the slicer, what we can do is click on the slicer, then go on the slicer tab and report connections. Click on report connections, and then we just connect the tables to the slicer. And now when we select an item, all the numbers change based on what we want. The next question asks us to add a timeline for the dataset provided. So again, we're gonna have to click on a pivot table, and timeline would mean date. So we select the order date because that's where we have dates. So you can see there is order by date, and we right click on the order date and click on add as timeline. And what we get is a timeline. And if we were to look at the sales and click on the sales on February, we would get the sales for February 2024, and we can extend that to later to the year or whatever time you would like. So I want to see for all of the data, so I'm just gonna clear it. And like the slicer, you're gonna have to report connections if you want it to work for all the tables. So I'm just gonna click on all tables, and if I change the timeline, all the data changes with it, which is pretty cool. The next and the final question is to create a pivot chart from any of the pivot tables we have worked on. So I think the one that makes the most sense for the pivot chart is the sales by region. So I'm just gonna click on the sales by region, and then we're gonna have a tab that says pivot table analyze. And then we click on pivot chart, and this one works perfectly. So I'm just gonna click it, and we have our chart ready. And the cool thing here is if I click on any of the slicers or the timeline, it will adjust accordingly. So if I wanted to see electronics and how it did in August by region, I get that view, which is pretty cool. And I can change based on if I want to see the one from which has the most sales or least sales in descending or ascending order. So if I go to more sort options and then I do descending and by sum of sales, the chart and the data will align accordingly. So it will always show accordingly, which is pretty cool. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it helps, and whether you use it for an interview or an exam, I hope you succeed.